The Cardinal Virtues. The school Adam's mother got him into was known as a liberal institution that, after some begging, accepted all those flunked specimens who couldn't manage elsewhere in the school system. The director there was an extremely peculiar type, a beatnik whose face was covered in a lion's mane and smallpox scars, who played guitar at events, and regularly drank the liquor out of the chemistry lab. It is truly incomprehensible how he came to run a school because, by all indications, he was more fit for archetypal, boilerplate intellectual work. Those who knew better suggested there was a person in the city government with the same surname. Years later, the leadership of this same school was entrusted to the hands of Pan Director's daughter. There are well-known dynasties of doctors, so why not principals too? Director Pani Supinski IV. Nepotism can sometimes bear unexpected fruit, because instead of the typical spectacled, chubby man in a gray suit in the hallways, he was a hirsute and maniacally energetic principal, who frequently greeted students by name, remembered their parents, and asked after their siblings who had already graduated. He was a man of the people. This strange chief had a fanciful outlook on his time and circumstances. That is, he built a hair salon in the school basement next to the coat shack. There, a playful lady he fancied could shear all those individuals whose shaggy appearance threatened the values of the builders of communism. The best was to shave the head completely bald. That way, there were no worries for a good chunk of time. They didn't end up needing any tools for the new job. A mirror and an armchair were more than enough. The chair was adjustable, so that the smaller children could be lifted up to the right height. They didn't wash hair in the salon, so children with lice were sent home to quarantine, where their mortified mothers had to scrub them lice-free with tar soap or turpentine. It's very clever to keep such an outpost of the health commissariat in a building like this, full of people whose background is poor and dirty. Because even if the school was officially oriented towards the humanities, more than half of its students were local, from the district, and the district was one of the worst in all of Warsaw. The school was the only decent structure in the area, a classical 4-story house with wings in an open park, around which was a tall, rusty, chewed-up iron fence. In the neighborhood around this temple of wisdom were horrible, putrefied shacks that might have deserved the name of homes 100 years ago. In these sheds lived a poor, regularly drunk working class. Their pale, spindly offspring did their homework in kitchens that smelled of herring offal and mahorka, as mustached fathers in faded tank tops prophylactically thwacked them in passing, their mothers looking on as they boiled cabbage soup. Complementing these outcasts were other ill-fitting members of society, usually talented dropouts from finer schools, a punishment par excellence. As hateful to their peers as to their teachers, every school community wants to be free of them. Such students watch from their desks with light, superior smiles, and the teacher standing at the front of the class will feel it in every bone. They are shameless know-it-alls, young anarchistic autodidacts who ask provocative questions and try to knock you, the authority, down at every turn. Even if they're tame at the beginning, ignorant of their strength, a watchful, experienced educator will recognize them instantly, proceed with great caution, and try to put the little ones in their places before revolt rears its head in them. It is important to root out intellect, confidence, moderation, and justice from every young soul, because the fruits of disobedience sprout from these virtues. Fortunately, these kinds of whizzes are about one per class. Sometimes you even get lucky and there aren't any. But if the size of the revolutionary element achieves a critical mass, as in this school of Warsaw untouchables, unpredictable things start to happen. A lazy, lackadaisical student who is always late and disappears from the last classes of the day is common enough, and the youth board deals with such cases. But if a third of the students at a middle school collectively boycott their school responsibilities, committees get worried, and the school leadership gets railed at. Earlier, Sulisław had gone to a refined school with an emphasis on French. It was right in the heart of the city, and proud of its traditions, its alumni, its cap and gown, and pretty much everything. In no circumstance could it be proud of its pupil Sulislav Saviza. Yes, the boy's parents had won Poland some renown, and this fact kept the worst at bay for a time. But there is a time when enough is enough. For 8 years this prestigious school put up with the young Zaviza, who couldn't sit still for a moment, chatted and ran around unceasingly, and stormed around like a tornado at break times. The boy was content to spend 15 minutes running up and down a hallway without any purpose at all, and without a care in the world for the aggravated staff. With extreme delicacy and the greatest of apologies, the parents were finally informed that their truly lovely, wonderfully gifted son should find himself a more suitable learning environment. They first tried to put Zaviza, then in the throes of puberty, into a school in relatively good stead, in the Bemovo district, not far from Tifel the Golden-Haired's place. But it seemed like such a huge downgrade from his former elite school, and he didn't want to go there at all. The new one wasn't even like a real school. It was a retirement home for pension-age drunks who were hammered even while teaching. Incidentally, teaching is one of the securest professions in the world. For example, there is a drawing teacher who is known for having never been evaluated once throughout a 40-year career. He was at his ease for all of those years, and taught children how to construct a rabbit or a dog or a cat out of larger and smaller circles or ovals. In total, Sulislav had seen in-class evaluations with his own eyes only once, in a literature class in 3rd grade. They gave 2 weeks' notice that people from the ministry would come by. Sulislav flunked brazenly out of this school/nursing home on account of his complete indifference to every subject, and he didn't regret it for a second. He was at the level of development where it wasn't the school against him, but him against the school. He didn't even bother to show up at all. Everybody wanted him to be there. Even the teachers looked at him with the kind of face that said, "Please be here." But he said, "Nuh-uh." All he wanted to do was drink coffee and smoke cigarettes at Jerzy Niemiec. He shoved all that mind-crushing drivel out of his brain, and never let it nest there again. Later, he would speak with complete conviction about how bad it is to shovel your head full of authoritarian theories that have been mashed together out of facts, theories that form the basis of the Satan state that surrounds us, and that brighter souls must then spend their entire lives and reconstructing, while the lazy, who can't be bothered to do such extensive demolition work, live in their ingested brainwashing. "I don't like it," Sulislav declared fierily, waving a hand at everything. "When they park this kind of waste in people's heads, some kind of world, so to speak, which has been thrown together by third-rate thinkers. I don't like it that they do it at an impressionable age, when your thinking is trusting and unsuspecting. I don't like that they start from clumsy nonsense presented as the Word of God, and then only much later move towards a more elegant, more open worldview. I think people grossly underestimate that element of coercion, that nefariousness of knowledge, that you can't later clean your brain of the vulgar general impression you get in elementary and middle school." He had really gotten heated. It was a thing that engaged him. Those little people, the future's building blocks. "I'd like to know," he asked, loudly and rhetorically, "on what basis, and to preserve what world, do they press those clock springs into a little person's brain at all? To my mind, the class smelt of blood. To my mind, the kids just twiddled their thumbs while the centuries got dumped off in a heap behind them. What actually happened was more like a dissection than anything else. Maybe once or twice it felt like Lenin was patting you on the head and saying, 'Study, study, study,' but otherwise the kids were just out in a huddle by the trash bins, where Antony the psychopath set a cat on fire, or somebody squashed a frog, or somebody tested to see if a snail would drown in piss." Zaviza's head was built differently. He only needed small keywords, tiny shards of knowledge's bottomless trove. He wanted to puzzle over these little pieces, and put them together in his own way, not to fall into anybody else's pattern. The interesting sound of a foreign word could thrill him, setting off a sudden chain of associations in his mind. He'd picked up the Finnish word for morning somewhere, aamu, And then the fact that the Finnish word for ghost is haamu, and arbitrarily deduced that, stylistically, the Finns consider the morning to be like a white spirit that strikes at the onset of night. Is that not beautiful? Truthfully, he hadn't read all that many books. He didn't have the persistence for it. All the same, he seemed to possess immense knowledge about an extraordinary range of things, and no matter what came up, Sulislav would offer a thorough, coherent disquisition that would also be utterly original. He would sketch the history of philosophy in passing, though he knew maybe only a colorful fact or two about each thinker's life. Indeed, it was from precisely these tiny bits of knowledge that he seemed to build completely new, unique arrangements, apparently effortlessly, even accidentally. Unexpected connections engrossed his brain. No one sees or looks at things with this kind of eye, nor juxtaposes such fluky, ill-fitting pieces. Our Sulislav was a true Icarus, who freed his mind from the labyrinth of dogmatic knowledge in which mere mortals are lost, and he built his wings out of any kind of factlet, and they stuck together. With them, he flew higher and higher. The next step of this expansive, all-encompassing thinker's downward spiral was a fun school for losers, because Sulislav's mother liked the idea of a good education in the humanities, and the main thing, anyway, is to lie to your mother that everything is okay. Because everything was okay. Jerzy Niemiec, who would later become the spiritual leader for all sorts of castaways, already went to that school. He was 2 years older than his classmates, had already started to go bald around the temples, and, to put it precisely, when he was there, he wasn't there, or was absent when present, or some other dicey notion. There is no need to know the kind of place he was in before fate slung him into the Warsaw Ghetto. As he didn't go to school much, he didn't even notice at first that someone new had appeared there, Adam Makiewicz, who got popular quickly in the changed circumstances. He was funny, and he drew ideological symbols and old men with Che Guevara berets everywhere, and in their own way, even the teachers looked out for him. In the spring, Niemiec's attendance dwindled even more. Even still, he wasn't expelled, but was simply left back to repeat the year, which shows the school's goodwill and heartwarming liberalism. Now, he was already 3 years older than the rest of them, and even more blasé. In the fall of 10th grade, the cast consisted first of Adam, its cornerstone, and then Sulislav, who landed there on his pilgrimage of fumbles. Dropping into their club like a fallen angel came Jerzy Niemiec, pale misanthrope. When fate finally brought the boys together, Adam was seized with an inspiring recognition. You, too, could just not go to school. Earlier, he'd accepted it as unfortunate but inescapable, carried his narrow form there, and studied entirely passively. It didn't demand any particular effort from him. Some subjects were even interesting, like biology. But now, he could with clean conscience tell it to fuck itself. And instead of going to school, the boys napped money from their parents and drank it away, usually in the basement of the apartment block where vibrantly coiffed, thick-booted Tiefel lived. Tiefel had already dropped out of school by that time, but he managed to hide the fact from his simple-minded mother by some magic trick. He didn't even try his luck anywhere else, but instead built his life on a false and permanent anguish. For at least 5 years in a row, Filek invented lively fairy tales. The high school was at some point replaced by an imaginary night school, while the real mornings were spent riding around in circles on the bus or, in better cases, smoking and drinking coffee in friends' kitchens, once their mothers had gone off to work. Unlike Adam's mom, who couldn't stand Sulislav, Tiefel's gracious mother liked Adam very much. After class, the friends sat in Filek's little room, and Sulislav bawled with laughter and shouted, "Dix! Dix!" in a loud voice. It was so hot in the basement here in the Little Bimovo district that they drank vodka there even years later, when the boys were on average 22, and the temperature outside was -18. The other refuge drawing the boys in with unstoppable force was Jerzy's place. Jerzy's family had a house sandwiched between bigger, clumsy apartment blocks, like a different reality butting into the city. They had a little garden and a red outhouse. This place was everything school wasn't. pleasant, cute, cozy, simply a nice place to be. At the time, Jerzy was also one of those extraordinarily magnetic people. It was impossible not to fall under his power when he lay crumpled majestically between his sheets like a Roman emperor, puffed on a cigarette, and chatted warmly with his disciples. He was born to have everything without the slightest trouble. A colossal intellect, unbelievable artistic gifts he wasted on the worst possible bits of paper, drawing his masterpieces in a brownish-yellow notebook with the designer's rapidograph. His entire circle was eager to buy him paper and art supplies, but Jerzy shook his head and said that they were just exercises to warm his hand. No need. There was a time when, under pressure from his companions, he did try to find a way to profit from his gifts by doing illustrations for books, but he always missed his deadlines, and ended up making something so unique and peculiar that it didn't match his client's vision at all. In the end, he told them all to go to hell, and from then on, he had absolutely nothing to do with society. He turned his back on it completely and finally. And not only on dickhead employers, no. Jerzy ended every relationship he had. With friends, with women. It is amazing that he didn't lose his mind. No, he was completely lucid, but he lived the rest of his life as if the world didn't exist. Once every 4 or 5 years, some old mate would look him up and try to convince him to come along again on a grand and new plan. No one had ever forgotten his art, and everyone would have liked to get their paws on it, and their ideas into it. At these surprise visits, an unchanged man of indeterminate age in a bathrobe and slippers opened the door. He looked deathly pale from sitting inside, and his hair, once gold as ducats, receded like a tonsure behind his ears. He let his guests politely into his room, which was Spartan and dominated by a moderate, but not apocalyptic, chaos. He heard his former companions out, made a relevant observation or two, thanked them for the offer, and informed them that he wasn't interested, even when they offered the kind of money that should not have existed in the People's Republic of Poland. Si tu as aimé l'école, tu vas aimer le travail, was his sly goodbye.